My name is Danielle Walker, and at 68 years old, I never imagined I would be thrown out of my own son, Thomas, and daughter-in-law Patricia Smith, home over a birthday cake. After selling my house to help them with their down payment and living with them for 3 years, one simple act of love for my grandson turned into a nightmare. What made it worse was that my brother James had just passed away, and I was still grieving. I had hoped for a peaceful retirement surrounded by family, but fate had other plans for me. Before I continue my story, where are you watching from today? Hit that subscribe button and let me know in the comments how you would handle living with difficult in-laws. I became a widow 5 years ago when my husband Robert passed away after 40 years of marriage. We had a modest but comfortable home in a small town in Maine, filled with memories we had built together over decades. When Robert died from a sudden heart attack, the house felt too empty, too quiet. Every corner held a memory that brought both comfort and pain. After 2 years of living alone, I made what I thought was a practical decision that would benefit everyone. My son Thomas and his wife Patricia were looking to buy their first home but struggling with the down payment. Their apartment was too small for their growing family, with 2 children, Emma and Michael, who were 6 and 9 at the time. I sold our family home and offered to give them the money for their down payment, with the agreement that I would come live with them. Thomas was thrilled at the idea, saying it would be wonderful for the children to grow up with their grandmother around. Patricia smiled and nodded, though looking back, I should have noticed the hesitation in her eyes. The first few weeks in their new home were pleasant. I had my own room on the first floor with an attached bathroom which gave me some privacy. I tried to make myself useful without overstepping, helping with the cooking when asked and watching the children after school until Thomas or Patricia came home from work. I treasured those afternoons with Emma and Michael, reading them stories, helping with homework, and baking cookies the way I used to with Thomas when he was their age. But small signs of trouble appeared early on. Patricia would rearrange the kitchen after I had cooked, implying I had put things in the wrong place. She would make comments about how different generations had different standards of cleanliness. When I offered to pick up groceries, she would insist on making the list herself, checking off items as if I might forget something or choose the wrong brand. I brushed these things off as normal adjustment issues. After all, it must be difficult having your mother-in-law in your space. I made extra efforts to accommodate Patricia and her ways, reminding myself that this was their home, not mine, despite my financial contribution. During this time, I also reconnected with my brother James, whom I hadn't spoken to in nearly 15 years due to a family disagreement over our parents' estate. He had moved to California and built a successful construction business. Our reconciliation began with cautious emails, then phone calls that grew longer and more frequent. James never married or had children, and as we rebuilt our relationship, he often expressed regret about missing out on family connections. He was particularly interested in hearing stories about my grandchildren. As months passed in Thomas and Patricia's home, the atmosphere grew increasingly tense. Thomas worked long hours as a software engineer, often coming home exhausted and retreating to his home office after dinner. This left me and Patricia circling each other cautiously in shared spaces. Patricia began to establish house rules, first casually mentioned, then later written down and stuck to the refrigerator. Rules about when the television could be, on which chairs were available for me to sit in, when they had company, and how long showers should last to conserve hot water. Thomas noticed the growing tension, but chose the path of least resistance. When I gently raised concerns, he would sigh and say, "Mom, Patricia just likes things a certain way. It's easier if we all try to get along. Can you just humor her?" The unspoken message was clear. This was Patricia's domain, and I was expected to adapt. By the end of the first year, I found myself spending more time in my room, emerging, mainly when the children came home from school or when Thomas was present. I began walking to the local library 3 times a week just to have somewhere to go. There I would call my best friend Sandra, who lived 2 states away, and confide my growing discomfort. "You sold your home to help them, and now you're living like a guest who has overstayed her welcome," Sandra would say, indignation clear in her voice. "You need to stand up for yourself, Danny." But I was caught in a difficult position. The money from my house was gone, invested in a property that wasn't mine. My retirement savings were modest, not enough to rent an apartment in the increasingly expensive area where Thomas lived. And most importantly, I couldn't bear the thought of losing daily contact with my grandchildren, who had become the center of my world. So I endured telling myself that families have rough patches and things would improve. I held on to moments of joy with Emma and Michael, the occasional family dinners, when Thomas insisted we all eat together, and my phone calls with James, who had become a source of emotional support from afar. What I didn't know then was that both my patience and my situation were approaching a breaking point, and that a simple birthday cake would be the catalyst for a dramatic change in my life. By the beginning of our second year living together, Patricia had graduated from subtle control to overt restrictions. One morning over breakfast, while Thomas was already at work, she slid a printed schedule across the table to me. "I think we need more structure around kitchen use," she said, with a tight smile. "This will help us avoid getting in each other's way." The schedule allocated me kitchen access from 9 to 10 in the morning and 3 to 4 in the afternoon. Any other time, I was expected to ask permission before entering what Patricia now exclusively referred to as her kitchen, despite the fact that I had contributed nearly 70% of the house's down payment. When I showed the schedule to Thomas that evening, he rubbed his temples and said, "Mom, Patricia has been stressed at work lately. Can you just go along with it for now? It's not forever." But temporary accommodations had a way of becoming permanent rules in that house. Soon after, I was informed that when they had guests over, which happened at least twice a month for Patricia's book club or Thomas' work colleagues, I should remain in my room to give them privacy. If I needed to use the bathroom during these gatherings, I was to use only my attached bathroom and not walk through the common areas. My financial contribution became another point of contention. Despite having given them the bulk of my savings for the down payment, Patricia began suggesting I wasn't paying my fair share of ongoing expenses. "Utilities have gone up since you moved in," she mentioned casually one evening, "and we buy more groceries now." Thomas looked uncomfortable but said nothing, as Patricia continued, "We think $500 a month would be fair for your portion of expenses." $500 was a significant amount from my fixed income. After paying for my personal expenses and medications not covered by insurance, this would leave me with barely anything to save. But I agreed, not wanting to be a burden, and hoping this would ease some of the tension. It didn't. The restrictions continued to multiply. I was asked not to do laundry on weekends because that was family time. My television viewing was restricted to times when the children were at school or after they went to bed, because Patricia was concerned about the programs I might watch, despite the fact I mainly watched cooking shows and nature documentaries. The children began to notice the strange dynamics. 10-year-old Michael asked me one day, "Grandma, why don't you eat dinner with us anymore?" I had taken to eating earlier during my designated kitchen time to avoid the uncomfortable silently family meals where Patricia would critique my table, manners, or comment on my portion sizes. "I just prefer to eat a little earlier, sweetheart," I told him, hating the lie but not wanting to burden him with adult problems. Emma, now 7, was more perceptive. She would sneak into my room after dinner, sometimes curling up next to me as I read, whispering, "Mom gets mad at everything you do. It's not fair." I would hug her and change the subject, encouraging her to tell me about school or her friends. I was determined not to turn the children against their mother, no matter how difficult the situation became. During this time, my phone calls with my brother James became my lifeline. He had been diagnosed with cancer and was undergoing treatment but never failed to check in with me weekly. "You know, Danny," he said during one call, "life is too short for this kind of treatment. You deserve better." "It's not so bad," I lied. "Thomas is caught in the middle, and I don't want to make things harder for him." James sighed. "You always put everyone else first. Maybe it's time to think about what you need." I brushed off his concern, not telling him how my savings were dwindling or how I sometimes lay awake at night wondering what would happen if I became seriously ill or needed more care as I aged. Would there be a place for me in this house where I was increasingly treated like an unwelcome guest? My friend Sandra was more blunt during our calls. "You need an exit strategy, Danny. This situation is becoming abusive." "But where would I go?" I asked her. "I can't afford rent anywhere decent, and I can't bear the thought of moving away from my grandchildren." There has to be another way, Sandra insisted. But I couldn't see one. The final straw came when Patricia announced that she would be hosting a neighborhood ladies' luncheon and needed to use my bathroom for the guests since it was on the first floor. "I'll need you to be out of the house. From 11 to 3, she informed me. Maybe go to the mall or something." I stared at her, finally finding my voice. "That would be 4 hours, Patricia. Where am I supposed to go for 4 hours in the middle of winter? I had no car, as I had sold mine along with the house." "The library has extended hours now," she replied, already turning away as if the matter was settled. "Or, call one of your friends." I had made a few acquaintances at the senior center, where I occasionally attended events, but no one close enough to impose upon for hours. Thomas, when told about this latest demand, merely suggested I could take a taxi to the shopping center and back. "It's just one afternoon, Mom," he said, his eyes not meeting mine. It was during this period that James' health took a turn for the worse. His calls became less frequent as he was in and out of the hospital. During what would be our last conversation, he made me promise something. "Danielle," he said, his voice weaker than before, "promise me you'll start standing up for yourself. Life is shorter than we think." I promised, though. I had no idea how I would keep that promise. 2 weeks later, I received the call that James had passed away. Patricia allowed me to fly to California for the funeral, though she made it clear that they couldn't afford for Thomas to come with me and that I would need to be back within 3 days because she had appointments that required her to have a babysitter for the children. I grieved alone in California, surrounded by James' business associates, but no family. His lawyer Harold spoke to me briefly after the service, mentioning that we would need to have a meeting about James' affairs, but I was too numb with grief to fully process what he was saying. I returned to Thomas' house, to my increasingly restricted existence, unaware that my brother's final act would soon change everything. Michael's 9th birthday arrived 3 weeks after I returned from James' funeral. Despite the growing restrictions on my movements in the house, birthdays had always been special occasions where I was permitted and even expected to participate. Since moving in with Thomas and Patricia, I had baked both Michael's and Emma's birthday cakes each year, continuing a tradition from Thomas' childhood. This year, however, Patricia informed me that she had ordered a cake from an upscale bakery in town. "It's a dinosaur theme," she explained as she showed me the receipt for a cake that cost nearly $200. Michael saw it in their catalog and fell in love with it. I nodded, swallowing my disappointment. Of course, if that's what Michael wants. She gave me a look that I had come to recognize, one that said she knew exactly what I was thinking. "It's just more professional looking than a homemade cake. The other parents at the party will expect something special." I understood the implication. My homemade cakes, despite the care I put into them, weren't good enough for Patricia's social circle. Rather than argue, I asked if there was something else I could contribute to the party. "I've got it all handled," she replied. "Just be ready to help clean up afterward." The morning of Michael's birthday, I woke early. Patricia and Thomas had planned a party with 10 of Michael's school friends in the afternoon, but the morning would be just family. I had bought Michael a set of astronomy books, had been wanting, carefully saving up from my dwindling funds. As I lay in bed, memories of Thomas' 9th birthday floated back to me. That year I had made him a special cake, a family recipe passed down from my grandmother. It was a simple vanilla cake, with a secret ingredient that made it extraordinarily moist, filled with homemade custard, and topped with chocolate ganache. It wasn't fancy or decorated with characters, but Thomas had declared it the best cake ever and requested it for several birthdays afterward. Making that cake for Thomas had been one of my happiest memories as a mother. The thought of Michael never experiencing that same tradition made my heart ache. Before I could talk myself out of it, I got up and checked the time. It was 6 in the morning hours before anyone else would be awake. Moving quietly, I went to the kitchen. According to Patricia's schedule, I wasn't supposed to be there until 9, but surely an exception could be made for a birthday. I gathered the ingredients for my grandmother's cake, thankful that I had purchased them earlier in the week, hiding them among my personal toiletries where Patricia wouldn't look. I worked efficiently, mixing the batter by hand to avoid the noise of the electric mixer. The familiar motions were soothing, taking me back to happier times. This wouldn't be a replacement for Patricia's elaborate dinosaur creation, I told myself. Just a small personal gift from grandmother to grandson, a taste of family history. I used a small round pan, making a cake just big enough for Michael to have a slice and maybe share with Emma if he wished. While it baked, filling the kitchen with a vanilla scent, I prepared the custard filling and chocolate ganache. I was so absorbed in my task that I didn't hear Patricia enter the kitchen until she spoke. "What do you think you're doing?" I turned to find her standing in the doorway, still in her bathrobe, arms crossed tightly over her chest. "Good morning, Patricia," I said, trying to keep my voice light. "I just wanted to make a small cake for Michael, a family recipe. It won't compete with the dinosaur cake, just a little extra tradition." Her face hardened. "I specifically told you I ordered a cake. This is exactly the problem, Danielle. You constantly undermine my authority in my own home." I blinked at her use of the phrase "my own home," another reminder that despite my financial contribution, I had no claim to this space. "It's not about authority," I explained gently. "It's about sharing something special with my grandson. The cake you ordered sounds wonderful, and this is just a small addition." The timer dinged, and I turned to remove the cake from the oven. As I set it on the cooling rack, Patricia moved closer, her voice lowering to a harsh whisper. "You did this deliberately. You knew I had everything planned perfectly, but you just couldn't stand not being the center of attention." "Patricia, please," I said, feeling a knot of anxiety tightening in my chest. "It's just a small cake. Michael doesn't even have to know it's from me if that makes you uncomfortable." She laughed, a short, bitter sound. "You think I'm stupid. You think I don't see what you're doing. Trying to make me look bad in front of my own children, making them think Grandma is the only one who really cares." I stepped back, genuinely confused by the intensity of her reaction. "Patricia, that's not at all what I'm doing. This is simply a family tradition." "Your family traditions don't matter here," she snapped. "This is my family now, and I decide what traditions we follow." The conversation was spiraling out of control. I had never seen Patricia this angry, her face flushed and hands trembling. I noticed the custard was about to boil over and turned to move it off the heat. In that moment, Patricia grabbed the small cake from the cooling rack. Before I could react, she threw it forcefully onto the plate. I had set out, smashing it into crumbs. Then, with a sweep of her arm, she sent the plate flying off the counter. It shattered against the wall, sending cake and ceramic shards across the floor. I stared in shock, unable to process what had just happened. "Get out," Patricia shouted, no longer concerned about keeping her voice down. "Get out of my kitchen. Get out of my house." Thomas appeared in the doorway, hair rumpled from sleep, eyes wide with confusion. "What's going on?" he demanded, taking in the mess on the floor and his wife's furious expression. "Your mother deliberately disobeyed me," Patricia said, pointing an accusing finger at me. "I told her I ordered a special cake for Michael, but she had to go behind my back and make one anyway. She has no respect for my role in this family." Thomas looked at me, waiting for an explanation. "I wanted to make the small cake I used to make for your birthday," I said quietly. "The one you loved so much. I wasn't trying to replace Patricia's cake, just add something small and meaningful." "Mom," Thomas sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Why couldn't you just go along with what Patricia planned? Why do you have to make everything so complicated?" His words hit me like a physical blow. In that moment, I realized that my son, my only child, would never take my side against his wife, no matter how unreasonable her behavior. Patricia wasn't finished. "This is the last straw," she declared. "I will not live with someone who constantly undermines me and disrespects my rules." Thomas looked panicked, glancing between his wife and me. "Let's all calm down," he suggested. "Mom didn't mean any harm, and it's Michael's birthday. Let's not ruin it with an argument." "It's already ruined," Patricia said coldly. "And I want her gone, today." "Patricia, be reasonable," Thomas pleaded. "Where is she supposed to go?" "I don't care," Patricia replied. "A hotel, a friend's place, wherever. But I can't take this anymore. Either she goes or I'll take the children and go stay with my mother." Thomas turned to me, desperation in his eyes. "Mom, maybe you should go stay with Sandra for a few days until things cool down." I stood there, covered in flour, surrounded by the destruction of a simple act of love, and something inside me finally broke. Not in a way that made me scream or cry, but in a way that brought a strange, icy calm. "I see," I said, my voice steady. "I will go pack my things." Patricia looked almost disappointed by my lack of resistance. "And don't come back," she added. "Well, arrange for a formal eviction if necessary." Thomas started to protest, but she cut him off. "I mean it, Thomas. I cannot live like this anymore." As I turned to leave the kitchen, I heard small footsteps on the stairs. Michael and Emma stood there in their pajamas, eyes wide with confusion and fear. "Why is everyone yelling?" Michael asked, his bottom lip trembling. "It's my birthday." Emma spotted the mess on the floor. "What happened to the cake?" Patricia quickly smoothed her expression into a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Nothing to worry about, sweetie. Grandma had a little accident, but everything is fine. You still have your special dinosaur cake for the party." Michael looked at me, his young face troubled. "Are you okay, Grandma?" I wanted so badly to go to him to hug him and wish him a happy birthday, but Patricia stepped between us. "Grandma needs to go out for a while," she said firmly. "Why don't you two go back upstairs and get dressed? We have a big day ahead." As they reluctantly turned to go, Emma looked back at me, her eyes filling with tears as if she understood something terrible was happening. I forced a smile for her benefit, then went to my room to pack what little I could carry. Within an hour, I had called a taxi and was leaving the house with one suitcase and my purse containing my identification medication and what remained of my savings. Thomas walked me to the door looking miserable but resigned. "I'll call you later, Mom," he promised in a low voice. "Just give Patricia some time to cool off." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. As the taxi pulled away, I caught a glimpse of two small faces watching from an upstairs window. I raised my hand in a wave, then turned away as tears finally began to fall. The taxi driver, an older gentleman with kind eyes, asked where I wanted to go. I had no answer ready, having never imagined I would be suddenly homeless at 68 years old. After a moment's thought, I gave him the address of the Lakeside Motel, an inexpensive establishment near the edge of town that I had passed many times on bus rides to the senior center. The motel room was clean, but sparse, with a double bed, a small table with 2 chairs, and a television that only received a handful of channels. I sat on the edge of the bed, my suitcase still packed beside me, trying to process what had happened and what to do next. My cell phone rang around noon. It was Thomas. "Mom," he began, his voice tight with tension. "Patricia wants to make this official. She says we need to have a formal eviction so there's no misunderstanding." I closed my eyes, absorbing this new blow. Your wife threw a plate at me and demanded I leave immediately. "I think the message was quite clear, Thomas." "I know, and am sorry about that," he said quickly. "She was just upset. But she feels that without paperwork you might try to come back when she's not home, and she doesn't want that kind of uncertainty." The suggestion that I would sneak back into a home where I was so clearly unwelcome was almost laughable, but I was beyond arguing. "What do you need me to do?" I asked. Thomas sounded relieved at my cooperation. "I have the papers drawn up. Can we meet somewhere tomorrow to sign them?" We arranged to meet at a coffee shop near the motel the following morning. After hanging up, I called Sandra, who was outraged on my behalf. "This is elder abuse, Danny," she exclaimed. "They can't just throw you out after you gave them your house money. You need to talk to a lawyer." I considered her advice but felt too exhausted to fight. Besides, what lawyer could I afford? My remaining savings would barely cover a week at the motel. That evening, I remembered the business card that James' lawyer, Harold Greenwood, had given me at the funeral. He had mentioned needing to speak with me about James' affairs. With nothing to lose, I called his office and left a message explaining my situation and asking if we could meet. To my surprise, he called back within the hour, his voice warm with concern. "Mrs. Walker, I'm so sorry to hear about your situation. I was actually planning to contact you this week about your brother's estate. Would you be able to come to my office tomorrow afternoon?" I explained that I had a meeting with my son in the morning to sign eviction papers, and Harold suggested I come to his office directly afterward. The next morning I arrived at the coffee shop, early, choosing a table in the corner where we would have some privacy. Thomas arrived precisely at 10, looking uncomfortable and sleep-deprived. To my surprise, Patricia was with him, her expression a mixture of smugness and irritation. "I thought this would be just you and me," I said to Thomas as they sat down across from me. "I wanted to make sure everything was handled properly," Patricia replied before Thomas could speak. "These are the eviction papers, and here's a list of your belongings still at the house. We'll have them delivered to wherever you're staying." She pushed a folder across the table. Inside were several pages of legal documents and a neatly typed inventory of my possessions. I scanned the eviction notice, which stated I had voluntarily agreed to leave the premises and would make no further claims against the property or its owners. Thomas cleared his throat. "Mom, I know this is difficult, but it's probably for the best. Patricia and I just can't handle the tension anymore, and it's not good for the kids either." I looked at my son, this man who had once been the center of my world, who I had raised alone after his father died when he was only 15. There was no trace of the boy who had cried on my shoulder after his first heartbreak, who had worked alongside me in our garden every summer, who had promised at his father's funeral that he would always take care of me. I thought of James' final words to me, his urging that I stand up for myself, but looking at Thomas now, I realized there was nothing to fight for here. My son had made his choice, and it wasn't me. With a strange sense of calm, I took out a pen and signed the papers. Patricia looked almost disappointed by my lack of resistance. "Well, have your things delivered this afternoon," she said, gathering the signed documents. "Can I say goodbye to the children?" I asked. Thomas started to nod, but Patricia cut him off. "I don't think that's a good idea right now. They're upset enough as it is. Maybe in a few weeks once everyone has adjusted." I knew this was just another way to punish me, but I had no leverage to argue. "Very well," I said, rising from the table. "Goodbye, Thomas." As I walked out of the coffee shop, I heard Thomas call after me. "But Mom, where are you staying? How can I reach you?" I didn't turn back. The offices of Greenwood Legal Services were located in a modest building downtown. Harold Greenwood himself, a man in his 60s with silver hair and wire-rimmed glasses, greeted me at reception and led me to a comfortable conference room. "Mrs. Walker, I'm truly sorry about your situation," he began, once we were seated. "Your brother spoke very highly of you, and he would be distressed to know what you're going through." "James and I had only reconciled recently," I said, still feeling the fresh pain of his loss. "We wasted so many years over a silly disagreement." Harold nodded sympathetically. He mentioned that to me. It's one of the reasons he made the decisions he did regarding his estate. He opened a folder on the table between us. "Mrs. Walker, I need to inform you that your brother James named you as the sole beneficiary of his estate." I blinked, trying to process this information. James had mentioned his construction business was successful, but Id had no idea of the extent. "The total value of the estate after taxes is approximately $8 million. Harold continued, watching my face carefully. "This includes his business, which has been sold to his partners, his investment portfolio, and several properties." I sat in stunned silence, unable to form words. Seeing my shock, Harold smiled gently. "The lady has just inherited $8 million from her brother," he said. "Her family doesn't know, right?" I shook my head. "No, I never discussed James' finances with them. We only reconnected recently, and I had no idea." $8 million. The number seemed impossible, unreal. Just hours ago, I had been calculating how many more nights I could afford at the motel before I would need to seek a shelter. Harold continued explaining the details of the inheritance, how the money was currently held, and what steps we would need to take to transfer it to my name. I heard only fragments, my mind still reeling from this dramatic reversal of fortune. "Mrs. Walker, Danielle Harold," said, breaking through my daze. "Are you all right?" I focused on his kind face, tears welling in my eyes. "Yes, I think I am. For the first time in years, I think I might actually be all right." As I left the law office with a folder of information and preliminary paperwork, I felt something I hadn't experienced in a long time: freedom. The weight of dependence that had forced me to accept Patricia's increasingly abusive behavior was suddenly lifted. I had choices now. I could go anywhere, do anything. But as I walked back to the motel, I realized that what I wanted most wasn't revenge or even justice. It was peace, dignity, and the chance to rebuild relationships with my grandchildren on healthier terms. With Harold's help, I would make a plan. That night in my small motel room, I slept more soundly than I had in 3 years. The next morning, I met with Harold Greenwood again for a more detailed discussion about my inheritance and financial planning. He brought in a financial advisor from his firm, Melissa Chen, who specialized in helping clients manage sudden wealth. "Danielle, this inheritance gives you enormous freedom, but it also comes with responsibilities," Harold explained. "You need to think carefully about how you want to use these resources." Melissa spread out several documents on the table. "This is an overview of your brother's investments," she said. "Hess built a diverse portfolio that's generating significant passive income. If managed properly, you could live very comfortably on the returns alone, without touching the principal." I studied the documents, feeling overwhelmed by the complex financial terminology. "I've never had to manage more than a teacher's salary and a modest pension," I admitted. "This is all new to me." "That's completely understandable," Melissa reassured me. "Many people who inherit significant wealth feel the same way. That's why we're here to help you create a plan that aligns with your values and goals." For the next 2 hours, we discussed various options. Harold explained that I would need to make decisions about investment strategies, tax planning, and possibly estate planning for my own legacy. Melissa suggested I think about my priorities: financial security, purchasing a home, travel, supporting causes I cared about, or providing for family members. Family. The word triggered a complex mixture of emotions. Despite everything that had happened, I still loved my son and grandchildren deeply. But I also recognized that my relationship with Thomas needed boundaries, and that any financial support would need to be carefully structured to avoid enabling the toxic dynamics it experienced. "I think I need some time to process all this," I told them, "but there are a few things I'm certain about. I want to rent a comfortable apartment immediately somewhere. I can feel secure while I figure out my next steps." Harold nodded. "That's a wise approach. We can arrange for an advance from the estate to cover immediate expenses. I'll have my assistant compile some apartment listings in the area. I also want to establish a college fund for my grandchildren," I added. "Regardless of what happens with my son and daughter-in-law, I want Emma and Michael to have educational opportunities." "We can set up education trusts," Melissa suggested. "They can be structured so that the money can only be used for qualified educational expenses." As our meeting concluded, Harold asked a question that caught me off guard. "Danielle, have you thought about whether you want your family to know about your inheritance?" I hesitated. My first instinct was to tell Thomas immediately, to see the look on his face when he realized what he'd thrown away. But that impulse felt petty, born of hurt rather than wisdom. "I don't think so, not right away," I finally replied. "I need time to establish my independence, to figure out who I am and what I want without their influence." "That's understandable," Harold said. "Everything we've discussed is confidential. You can share information about your financial situation on your own timeline, when and if you're ready." Over the next week, with Harold's assistance, I rented a modest 1-bedroom apartment in a secure building for seniors. It was clean and bright, with a small balcony overlooking a community garden. The furniture was basic but comfortable, and for the first time in years, I could arrange things exactly as I pleased without fear of criticism. I also consulted with Dr. Rachel Weber, a therapist Harold recommended, who specialized in helping older adults navigate family conflicts and life transitions. "What you've experienced is a form of elder abuse," Dr. Weber told me during our first session: "financial exploitation, emotional abuse, and ultimately, abandonment. It's important that you recognize this wasn't your fault." I struggled with that concept. "I keep thinking I should have done more to adapt to make things work," I confessed. "Maybe if it'd been less intrusive, more careful to follow Patricia's rules." Dr. Weber shook her head firmly. "You contributed the majority of the down payment for their home, yet you were treated as an unwelcome guest. No amount of compliance would have been enough, because the problem wasn't your behavior. The problem was that your daughter-in-law saw you as a threat to her control, and your son enabled her behavior." Over several sessions, Dr. Weber helped me work through my feelings of abandonment, betrayal, and grief. She encouraged me to focus on building a new life that reflected my own values and desires, rather than orienting everything around my son's family. With Melissa Chen's guidance, I developed a financial plan that prioritized security and modest comfort. I didn't need or want extravagant luxury, but I wanted to never again be vulnerable to financial dependence. We allocated a portion of my inheritance to a conservative investment portfolio that would generate monthly income, establish the education trusts for my grandchildren, and set aside a fund for a future home purchase when I was ready. I also decided to honor James' memory by establishing a scholarship foundation in his name, providing construction training opportunities for disadvantaged young people. This felt like a fitting tribute to my brother, who had built his success from nothing and who had ultimately provided me with the means to rebuild my own life. As weeks passed, I began to feel stronger, more centered. My apartment became a sanctuary, decorated with a few cherished possessions that Thomas had reluctantly delivered from his home. I joined a book club at the local library and a walking group for seniors, slowly building a new social circle. I spoke with Sandra regularly, and she promised to visit soon. I hadn't heard from Thomas since the day I signed the eviction papers. Several times, I'd picked up my phone to call him, wanting to check on my grandchildren, but always stopped myself. Dr. Weber had advised me to give myself time to heal before re-establishing contact, to approach any future relationship from a position of strength rather than need. One evening, as I was arranging fresh flowers on my dining table, a small luxury I now allowed myself, Harold called with news. "Danielle, the final paperwork for your inheritance has been processed," he said. "The funds have been transferred according to our plan, and all the accounts are now in your name." "Thank you, Harold," I replied, feeling a wave of gratitude for his steady support. "I couldn't have navigated this without you." "It's been my pleasure," he said warmly. "James would be proud of how you're handling this. Now, have you given any more thought to purchasing a home?" I had been considering this question for weeks. Part of me wanted to move far away, to start completely fresh in a new city, but the thought of leaving the area where my grandchildren lived was painful. Despite everything, I wasn't ready to give up on having a relationship with them. "Yes, I think I'm ready to start looking," I told him. "Something in this area, but not too close to Thomas." "I'll put you in touch with an excellent realtor," Harold promised. "Just remember, there's no rush. This should be a home that truly feels right for you." After we hung up, I sat on my balcony watching the sunset, reflecting on how dramatically my life had changed in just a few weeks. From homelessness to financial security, from powerlessness to autonomy. The hurt of Thomas' betrayal was still there, a dull ache that flared when I saw children who reminded me of Emma and Michael. But alongside that pain was something new, a growing sense of possibility of a future shaped by my own choices rather than others' demands. I thought of James' final words to me, his urging that I stand up for myself. "I wish you could see me now, brother," I whispered to the evening sky. "I'm finally learning how." 3 months after the cake incident, I found myself pushing a shopping cart through the produce section of Anderson's Market, the upscale grocery store across town from where Thomas lived. I had avoided my old neighborhood entirely, not ready to risk chance encounters that might reopen wounds still in the process of healing. My life had developed a pleasant new rhythm. Each morning I took a walk in the community park near my apartment. Afternoons were often spent with my book club friends, or volunteering at the local elementary school, reading to children who reminded me of my grandchildren without triggering too much pain. In the evenings I cooked simple but nourishing meals for myself, sometimes inviting neighbors over to share them. With the help of my realtor Judith Blackwell, I had found a lovely craftsman-style home in Riverside, an established neighborhood known for its tree-lined streets and strong community feel. The closing was scheduled for the following week. It was smaller than Thomas' house but perfect for my needs, with a guest room for Sandra when she visited, and a fenced backyard where I could start a garden. I was examining avocados when I heard a familiar voice behind me. "Mom." I turned to find Thomas standing there, a half-filled shopping basket in his hand, looking as though he'd seen a ghost. "Hello, Thomas," I said, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. He stared at me, taking in my appearance. I knew I looked different. No longer dressing to fade into the background, as I'd done at his house, I wore a deep blue blouse that Sandra had told me brought out my eyes, and I'd recently had my silver hair styled in a flattering bob. "You look good," he said, sounding confused. "How are you?" Well, thank you," I replied, maintaining the polite distance Dr. Weber had advised for initial contact. "How are Emma and Michael?" At the mention of his children, Thomas' expression softened. "They're okay. They miss you. Michael asks about you all the time." A pang shot through my heart. I miss them too. Very much. An awkward silence fell between us. Thomas shifted his weight from one foot to another, glancing around as if afraid Patricia might appear at any moment. "Where are you living now?" he finally asked. "We tried to find you after we dropped off your things at the motel, but they said you'd checked out." "I rented an apartment," I said, not offering more details. "It's been comfortable." Thomas looked relieved. "Good, that's good. I was worried." I raised an eyebrow. "Were you?" He had the grace to look ashamed. "Mom, about what happened. Patricia was under a lot of stress and—" I held up a hand. "Thomas, I'm not interested in revisiting that day. What's done is done." He nodded, then gestured to my shopping cart, which contained several high-quality ingredients and a bottle of good wine. "Looks like you're doing okay financially," he commented. "I was concerned about that too." "I manage," I said simply. Before he could respond, his phone rang. He checked the screen and his expression tightened. "It's Patricia," he said. "I should go." "Of course." He hesitated, then added, "Maybe we could talk sometime. About the kids." I'd like that, I said, surprised by how much I meant it despite everything. "You have my number." As Thomas hurried away, I continued my shopping, my hands trembling slightly as I selected tomatoes and herbs. The encounter had been brief but significant, a first crack in the wall between us. 2 days later, my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. "Hello," I answered cautiously. "Danielle." It was Patricia, her voice syrupy with a friendliness I'd rarely heard directed at me. "How are you?" "I'm fine, Patricia," I replied, keeping my tone neutral. "What can I do for you?" "Well, Thomas mentioned he ran into you at the grocery store, and you looked really well," she said. "We're all just so relieved. We were worried about you." I nearly laughed at this revision of history, but Dr. Weber's advice echoed in my mind. Maintain boundaries without unnecessary conflict. "That's thoughtful of you," I said instead. She pushed ahead, her voice becoming even sweeter. "Listen, the children miss you terribly. Emma cries for you sometimes, and Michael keeps asking when Grandma is coming back. We thought maybe you could come for dinner this weekend. Start fresh." The manipulation was transparent. She was using the children to reel me back in. 3 months ago, I might have accepted any terms just to see my grandchildren again. Now I recognize the need for clear boundaries. "I do miss the children," I said carefully. "But I think before any visits, you and I need to have an honest conversation about expectations and respect." There was a pause then. Patricia's voice cooled noticeably. "What do you mean?" "I mean that I won't return to a situation where I'm treated as an unwelcome guest or subjected to arbitrary rules," I said firmly. "If I'm to have a relationship with my grandchildren, it needs to be based on mutual respect." "Well, it's our home," she began, the familiar, controlling tone creeping back. "We have the right to—" "You're absolutely right," I interrupted gently. "It's your home and you set the rules there, which is why any visits with the children will need to take place at my home or in public places like the park." "Your home," she sounded confused. "The apartment." "I'll be moving into my new house next week," I explained. "It's in Riverside." There was a long silence. Riverside. But those homes are expensive. "I was fortunate to find something within my budget," I said, not elaborating. I could almost hear the calculations happening in Patricia's mind. "Thomas said you were buying nice groceries and now a house in Riverside. Did you get some kind of settlement, insurance money from your brother?" "My financial situation is private, Patricia," I replied. "But rest assured, I'm quite secure." Another long pause. Well, she finally said, "I'm sure we can work something out about visiting the children. I'll talk to Thomas and get back to you." After she hung up, I called Sandra to report on the conversation. She howled with laughter at my description of Patricia's fishing for financial information. "Oh, I wish I could have seen her face," Sandra exclaimed. "She's probably already planning how to get her hands on whatever money she thinks you have." Probably, I agreed, but am more concerned about seeing my grandchildren again. The following week after moving into my new home, I received a text from Thomas asking if he could stop by. Alone, he emphasized. When he arrived, he stood on my porch staring at the house with undisguised shock. "This is yours?" he asked as I invited him in. "Yes, I just moved in," I said, leading him to the living room where afternoon sun streamed through stained glass window accents. He turned in a slow circle, taking in the tasteful furnishings, the built-in bookshelves, the glimpse of the kitchen with its granite countertops. "Mom, how is this possible?" he finally asked. "Where did this money come from?" I gestured for him to sit down. "I think we need to have an honest conversation, Thomas." For the next hour we talked more openly than we had in years. I didn't immediately reveal the inheritance, instead focusing on the emotional impact of how I'd been treated in his home. "I gave you most of the money from selling my house," I reminded him. "Yet I was treated like an intrusion subject to rules that became increasingly controlling and unreasonable." Thomas looked down at his hands. "I know. I should have stood up to Patricia more. It was easier to go along. To keep the peace. And in keeping the peace with your wife, you sacrificed your relationship with your mother," I said quietly. "And ultimately, you taught your children that treating an elderly family member with disrespect is acceptable." He flinched at that. "The kids were devastated when you left. Emma told Patricia she was mean for making Grandma go away. Michael refused to eat the dinosaur cake. Despite everything that made me smile a little. They have good hearts." Thomas rubbed his face, suddenly looking exhausted. "Patricia's been different since you left. More controlling even with me. Nothing I do is right anymore. And she's obsessed with figuring out where you're getting money from. When I told her about this house, she was up half the night searching online for your brother's obituary, convinced he must have left you something." I let that statement hang in the air for a moment. Thomas looked up, his eyes widening. "Did he leave you something?" It was time for honesty. "Yes, Thomas. James left me his entire estate. He was more successful than I realized." Thomas swallowed. "How much?" $8 million. He sat back as if it struck him. $8 million, and we threw you out over a birthday cake." "The irony isn't lost on me," I said dryly. To his credit, Thomas didn't immediately ask for money or try to apologize his way back into my good graces. Instead, he buried his face in his hands. "I really messed up, didn't I?" "We both made mistakes," I acknowledged. "But yes, you chose Patricia over me in a situation where I deserved your support." He looked up, his eyes red. "What happens now?" "That depends," I told him. "I'm willing to rebuild our relationship, but it needs to be different than before. And my relationship with Patricia will need clear boundaries." "She wants to reconcile," he said quickly, "especially once I tell her about." I shook my head firmly. "Thomas, if your wife's interest in reconciliation is based on my financial status, that's not a foundation for a healthy relationship. I'm not looking to buy my way back into your lives." He had the grace to look embarrassed. "You're right, I'm sorry." As Thomas prepared to leave, he hesitated at the door. "Can I bring the kids to see you sometime? They really do miss you." "I'd like that very much," I said, feeling a knot of emotion in my throat. "But Thomas, you'll need to prepare Patricia. I'm willing to have a civil relationship with her, for the sake of the family. But I won't be subjected to her control again. And I won't have the children used as pawns." He nodded soberly. "I understand." After Thomas left, I sat in my new living room watching the late afternoon sun create patterns on the hardwood floor. A weight I hadn't realized I was still carrying seemed to have lifted. For the first time, I had spoken my truth to my son without fear of homelessness or isolation. Whether he chose to really hear me remained to be seen, but it'd taken the first step toward an authentic relationship based on mutual respect rather than dependence. The next day, I received a series of angry texts from Patricia, accusing me of trying to drive a wedge between her and Thomas, of lying about my financial situation to make her look bad, and finally demanding to know exactly how much money I had, and whether I intended to share it with my family, who really needed it more than I did. I didn't respond to the texts following Dr. Weber's advice to disengage from toxic communication. Instead, I focused on settling into my new home and finalizing plans for the James Walker Memorial Scholarship Foundation, which would launch the following month. Thomas called that evening apologetic. Patricia found out about the inheritance, he said, his voice tired. She didn't take it well. I gathered that from her texts, I replied. She wants me to convince you to give us some of the money, he admitted. For a bigger house private school for the kids. And what do you want, Thomas? I asked. There was a long pause. I want my children to have their grandmother back, he finally said. The rest, that's between you and your conscience. It wasn't a perfect answer, but it was honest. And for now, that was enough to begin rebuilding what had been broken. 6 months after the day, Patricia smashed a birthday cake, and my world along with it. I stood in my garden planting tulip bulbs that would bloom the following spring. The October air was crisp, carrying the scent of fallen leaves and wood smoke from a neighbor's fireplace. As I patted soil over the last bulb, I heard the unmistakable sound of children's laughter coming from the driveway. Grandma, Emma, and Michael came running around the corner of the house, followed by Thomas carrying a bag of takeout food. These Saturday afternoon visits had become our new tradition over the past few months. Thomas would bring the children to spend a few hours with me, sometimes staying himself, sometimes using the time to run errands. Patricia never accompanied them, maintaining a cold distance punctuated by occasional demands for financial help, which I consistently refused. Look what I made in art class. Emma held up a watercolor painting of what appeared to be a house with a garden. It's your new home. It's beautiful, sweetheart, I told her, genuinely touched. I'll hang it in my office. Michael, now 9.5, helped me gather my gardening tools. I finished that space book you gave me, he said proudly. The one about black holes. Can we look through your telescope tonight? If your dad says it's okay to stay after dinner, I agreed, smiling at Thomas, who nodded. As we moved inside to wash up before eating, I reflected on how much had changed since the day I walked out of Thomas' house with one suitcase and a broken heart. The journey hadn't been easy or straightforward, but slowly, piece by piece, I had rebuilt not just my life but my sense of self-worth. With Harold's continued guidance, I had established a foundation that now provided construction training scholarships to 5 disadvantaged young people each year. I volunteered twice a week at a local senior center, helping other elderly residents navigate housing challenges and family conflicts. And it formed new friendships through my gardening club and book group, creating a support network that didn't depend solely on family ties. Thomas had changed too. Our conversations had gradually become more honest, sometimes painfully so. He had started seeing a therapist of his own, working through the patterns that had led him to enable Patricia's controlling behavior. Patricia's, like Mom was, he confessed during one of our deeper talks. My mother controlled my father completely, and he never stood up to her. I swore it'd never be like him, but somehow I ended up in exactly the same dynamic. Understanding the roots of his behavior didn't excuse it, but it helped me forgive him. Some wounds healed faster than others. I still felt a pang when I thought about missing Michael's 9th birthday party, or when Emma mentioned something Patricia had said about me in my absence. But the raw, open wound of betrayal had gradually scabbed over, forming a scar that was sensitive but no longer bleeding. After dinner that evening, as Thomas helped Michael set up the telescope on the back deck, Emma snuggled next to me on the porch swing. "Mommy still gets mad when we come here," she confided in a small voice. "She says you're trying to steal us away." I chose my words carefully, knowing that criticizing Patricia would only put Emma in a difficult position. "Your mommy loves you very much, and sometimes love makes people afraid of losing what matters to them. But you have plenty of love for both of us, don't you?" She nodded solemnly. "I wish you could come to our house again." Maybe someday, I said, not wanting to make promises I couldn't keep. But for now, isn't it nice to have special time just for us here? Emma seemed satisfied with that answer, moving on to tell me about her dance recital the following week, which I had been invited to attend, a small but significant concession from Patricia. Later, after Thomas and the children had left, I sat alone in my living room with a cup of tea, thinking about the strange and unexpected path my life had taken. James' inheritance had given me financial security, but the real gift had been the freedom to discover my own strength. For too long, I'd defined myself primarily as Thomas' mother, measuring my worth by his approval and inclusion in his family. Now, while I still treasured that relationship, it was just one facet of my identity, not its entirety. The following week brought another development. Thomas called to tell me he and Patricia had started marriage counseling. It was either that or divorce, he admitted. Things have been bad since. Well, since we found out about your inheritance, honestly, Patricia can't let go of the idea that you should be sharing it with us. But the counselor is helping us see that we have different values around money and family. I'm proud of you for doing this work, I told him sincerely. Whatever happens, you're taking responsibility for your own happiness. He was quiet for a moment. The counselor asked if you'd consider joining us for a session, he finally said, to talk about how we might rebuild some kind of relationship between you and Patricia. My immediate instinct was to refuse. Dr. Weber had warned me about being pulled back into toxic dynamics, and Patricia had shown little genuine remorse for her treatment of me. But I also knew that complete estrangement from her meant a perpetually fragmented relationship with my son and grandchildren. I'll think about it, I promised Thomas. After consulting with Dr. Weber, I agreed to a single session with clear boundaries established beforehand. The meeting was tense, but productive, with the counselor skillfully mediating between Patricia's defensive posturing and my firm boundaries. We didn't emerge as friends, but we reached a tentative agreement about my role in my grandchildren's lives, which was a start. As autumn deepened toward winter, I finalized my estate plan with Harold, establishing trusts for Emma and Michael that would fund their education and provide a modest nest egg when they reached adulthood. I also allocated funds for Thomas, but with specific conditions. The money would be held in trust until he was 50, by which time I hoped he would have developed the strength and independence to use it wisely, regardless of whether his marriage to Patricia endured. The rest of my estate would go to the Scholarship Foundation, ensuring James' legacy and mine would continue to create opportunities for young people who needed them. One crisp December morning, as I decorated my home for the holidays, preparing for a small gathering of new friends and family, I came across an old photo album I'd recently unpacked. Inside was a picture of Thomas on his 9th birthday, proudly standing beside the special cake I'd made him, the same recipe I'd attempted to make for Michael on that fateful day. Looking at the image, I felt not the sharp pain of recent months, but a gentler nostalgia. The young woman in the photo, arm around her son, had loved deeply, but perhaps too timidly, too willing to sacrifice her own needs for others' comfort. The woman I had become, older but stronger, scarred but wiser, would always love her family, but had finally learned to love herself as well. Life rarely gives us perfect resolutions. My relationship with Thomas remained a work in progress. My interactions with Patricia, civil but distant. But within the imperfection, I'd found something precious, the knowledge that I was enough on my own terms without apology or permission. As I placed the photo back in the album, my phone chimed with a text from Thomas' kids, asking if they can help decorate your Christmas tree tomorrow. Okay. I smiled and typed back, I'd love that. Tell them Grandma will have hot chocolate waiting. Some might say my story is about money and how it changes relationships, but I know better. It's about finding your voice when you've been silenced, your dignity when you've been diminished, and your strength when you've been told you're too old or too insignificant to matter. Whether you have $8 million or $8 to your name, remember this: your worth isn't determined by how others treat you, but by how you ultimately choose to treat yourself. What about you? Have you ever had to stand up for yourself against family pressure or unfair treatment? What helped you find your strength? Share your story in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, Please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need to hear that it's never too late to start over. Thank you for being part of this journey with me, and remember that the most powerful inheritance we can receive is the courage to be true to ourselves.